Okay. Okay, let us start the seventh session of the governance capacity development session series. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the seventh session on innovating public governance and leveraging public digital technologies for inclusion of vulnerable groups. This session will be opened by Mr. Bokun Shim, the head of UNPOC, then followed by 3 thematic presentations. After the 3 presentations, we will have a Q&A session. So during the session, if you have any questions, please put the questions on the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of this Zoom box at the right bottom corner. So, okay, now let me invite Mr. Bokun Shim to deliver short opening remarks. Mr. Shim, you have the floor. You are muted. Can you unmute?
Sorry, thank you, Keping. Distinguished participants, Ms. Achiko Okuda, Regional Director, ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Mod Razwan Afandi bin Abdurrahim, Director of Sharing Economy Development Department, Digital Skills and Jobs Division, Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation. I would like to welcome you all to the session on innovating public governance and leveraging digital technologies for inclusion of vulnerable groups, which is the 7th session of UN DESA SNU Governance Capacity Development Series. I especially thank our distinguished speakers from ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific and MDEC for participating in today's session to share their insights on this very important topic. Promoting inclusion of vulnerable groups and the furthest left behind is essential for ensuring leaving no one behind. The decade of action calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to all world's biggest challenges, including reducing inequality. Vulnerable groups often confront barriers that prevent them from accessing public services or fully participating in political, economic, and social life. The COVID-19 pandemic has further marginalized vulnerable groups and exacerbated their vulnerabilities, reversing decades of progress made by many governments in reducing poverty and inequality. For fostering inclusion of vulnerable groups, governments need to move from business as usual to innovation in governance. Meanwhile, it is imperative to harness frontier technologies and digital government as the effective means of government innovation to enable the social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Also, advancing the digital economy can contribute to inclusion and the empowerment of marginalized populations by creating job opportunities, promoting economic participation, and enabling inclusive access to finance. During the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the access to internet has become a lifeline as many public services and economic activities have been converted online. Yet, many vulnerable groups do not have access to the internet and the digital devices, and they often lack digital skills and the literacy to survive from the crisis. Therefore, it is essential that governments address the digital divide and promote digital inclusion through collaboration with other stakeholders. Lastly, to promote innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups, it is important to foster inclusive mindsets and develop capacities and the skills of government officials, as well as other relevant stakeholders, and build an enabling ecosystem with the empowerment and engagement of vulnerable groups. Taking this occasion, it is my great pleasure to introduce the training toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups, which DPIDG UN POG has developed as part of DESA's curriculum on governance for the SDGs to support capacity development of public servants and other stakeholders. In this important area, the toolkit is available on Unpan website, and the detailed information will be shared by my colleague during the session. I hope today's session can provide all of you a valuable opportunity to learn and exchange innovative approaches, strategies, and practices for fostering inclusion of vulnerable groups and ensuring leaving no one behind. I look forward to the insightful presentations by the distinguished speakers and active engagement of the participants during today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shim. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shim, for your insightful opening remarks and highlighting the importance of government innovation for promoting inclusion of vulnerable groups, especially the challenges of digital inclusion, which set a good scene for our discussion today. Thank you. So now I would like to invite Ms. Mi-Kyung Park, the Governance and Public Administration Officer from UNPOC, to deliver a presentation on government innovation for inclusive public service delivery and participation of vulnerable groups in policy processes. Ms. Park, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Keping. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Mi-Kyung Park from UNPOG DPIDG DESA, and it's my great pleasure to deliver this presentation today. The topic of my presentation is government innovation for inclusive public service delivery and participation of vulnerable groups in policy processes. Next, please. And before we begin, I would like to start by sharing some facts. We can see from various facts in this slide here that there is exclusion and marginalization of vulnerable groups in many areas, including in access to public service, access to the internet, and economic participation. Indeed, the marginalized status of these vulnerable groups has been further impacted due to the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, as Mr. Shim has just also highlighted earlier in his remarks. So my presentation today will cover how government can innovate to provide more inclusive public service and foster participation of vulnerable groups in policy processes, including by leveraging digital technologies. And next, please. And further to this, I would like to invite participants to share your ideas on inclusion of vulnerable groups. And for that, I would like to share my screen, please. Thank you. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. I think some of our participants who have joined our previous sessions would be familiar with this Mentimeter, where we would like to kindly invite participants to share your ideas and experience and thoughts before we start the presentation. So please kindly use your laptop or mobile phone to join to access www.menti.com and use the given code here 7747-1728 to share your ideas with other distinguished participants. Yes. You can join the Mentimeter and enter the code. And the first question is, what do you think are the major barriers to inclusive public service and policy participation of vulnerable groups? We've just seen from the facts in my previous slide that there is the marginalization and exclusion of vulnerable groups. And what do you think, based on your thoughts or experiences, are the major barriers for this? I see that participants have already provided their inputs, which include the no access to the internet or other infrastructure, or there's also knowledge gap, lack of budget, affordability, yes, or different interests of stakeholders, lack of understanding, lack of information dissemination, or capacity. And there's also idea on culture, awareness, yes, and legislation, lack of vision, also low budget, digital inclusion, and corruption, lack of effective communication, energy, smart device, internet, bureaucracy, and corruption. I think some of the, there is another term, awareness, lack of technical skills, connectivity, and simplifications. Okay, maybe we can give a few more seconds for more participants to share their ideas before we move on to the next question. Lack of budget, centralization. Yes, I think many of ideas here are indeed critical barriers in many countries and many situations. And indeed, I think my presentation and today's session's discussion will also include many of the ideas here. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite the participants to answer to the next question, please. Then, what do you think are the two most effective means to engage vulnerable groups in policy processes? Here, we have 6 choices for you to choose up to 2 choices. I hope participants, yes, can vote. Yes, the first choice is leveraging digital technologies. Second one is conducive legal framework and policy guidance. Third one is collaboration with other stakeholders. Fourth one is institutionalizing the engagement mechanism. Fifth one is open government data. And the sixth one is regular monitoring and evaluating the process. And seventh is other. So if there is other effective means that you think are not indicated in the choices, please do check other here and kindly share your other elements or means in the chat box for sharing with other participants. I see up to now, the most chosen choice is leveraging digital technologies. And the second one is regular monitoring and evaluating the process, as well as institutionalizing the engagement mechanism and conducive legal framework and policy guidance. Yes, maybe a few more seconds for participants who didn't have a chance to share yet, could share your choices. Okay. Thank you. So I still see that leveraging digital technologies is the first choice, followed by also collaboration with other stakeholders. Thank you very much. These elements, dimensions, means will be shared, introduced in my presentation. So please see what kind of strategies are being introduced in my presentation based on also the ideas you've shared. Thank you very much once again for your active participation. So this is the table of contents for my presentation today. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, first to begin with, as has been emphasized during our previous sessions, leaving no one behind and inclusion of all, including vulnerable groups, is the overarching principle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Next, please. And specifically, the 2030 Agenda emphasizes to meet the SDG goals and targets for all nations and peoples, and for all segments of the society by reaching the furthest behind first. And it highlights the empowerment of vulnerable groups. Next, please. And if some of you may recall the 11 principles of effective governance for sustainable development endorsed by UN ECOSOC in 2018, inclusiveness is one of the 3 pillars, along with effectiveness and accountability. And here in this slide, there are some commonly used strategies for implementing the 5 principles of inclusiveness, which are leaving no one behind, non-discrimination, participation, subsidiarity, and intergenerational equity, many of which will also be covered in this presentation today. Next, please. And before we move on to the next part, I would like to highlight that it's important to understand that vulnerability of vulnerable groups is multifaceted with multiple and interlinked factors, and it is heterogeneous even within the same group. And many vulnerable people are often confronted with multiple vulnerabilities, and vulnerability varies from situation to situation, and it's evolving and dynamic. And all these nature and dimensions of vulnerability and vulnerable populations require a paradigm shift by government as well as other stakeholders in the society to move from the traditional way of delivering services and engaging with vulnerable groups to governance innovation. Next, please. So now we'll see how public service can be innovated to be more inclusive. Next, please. To start with some recent trends, we can see from this graph here from the 2020 UN e-government survey that an increasing number of countries are providing online services to vulnerable groups, including youth, women, older persons, persons with disabilities, immigrants, and people living in poverty since 2016. Next, please. And here in this diagram, you can see the type of public services provided online is also very diverse. And for example, most countries provide online services for registering a business, applying for government vacancies online, and applying for driver's license. Yet at the same time, we can see that there are regional disparities, that the European countries provide more online services than other regions. Next, please. Then, what are the major obstacles to inclusive public service delivery? Here are some of the major barriers, which would include lack of accurate understanding of the different needs of different vulnerable groups, lack of knowledge and disaggregate data about vulnerable groups, lack of efficient means of implementation, complex bureaucratic and slow processes, segmented and disjointed service delivery, lack of information about the services, lack of literacy and skills to access and use public services, among others. And I think many of the ideas here are indeed overlap also with the ideas that you've shared during our Mentimeter idea sharing. Yes, and next, please. And to address these challenges and promote innovation for inclusive public service, here are 5 approaches and strategies to be introduced during this part with some innovative practices. And throughout this part, we'll also specifically see how ICT, frontier technologies, and digital government can foster these as an important enabler. Next, please. First and foremost, identifying vulnerable groups and accurate understanding of their special vulnerabilities is the first stage of providing an inclusive service delivery. Through this, a government can ensure that everyone is counted for and included as the beneficiaries of the public service. However, many people around the world, especially the poorest and the most vulnerable groups, actually lack formal identification records, such as ID cards or birth certificates, making them difficult to access essential services and entitlements. And next, please. And to address this issue, there have been efforts by many countries for better identifying the vulnerable groups and inclusive ID management. For example, here is the ID Poor platform, which is the poverty identification mechanism tool of Cambodia, where the identified beneficiaries receive the equity cards. And there is this is also a community-driven initiative based on participation and consultation with the local residents of each village. And also the data is shared and updated on the online platform for effectively managing accurate, up-to-date information, and also for sharing with other service providing stakeholders. Yes, next, please. Another example here is Canada's COVID-19 health dashboard, which uses Canada's community health survey to identify high-risk communities. It classifies at the community level the population of people aged over 70, or the number of people with pre-existing health conditions that put them greater risks to COVID-19. And this interactive map also provides information on the nearby medical facilities and their services. Next, please. Second strategy is about providing customized public services for the special demands of vulnerable groups. So based on the accurate understanding of the specific needs of vulnerable groups and also incorporating the local context of vulnerability, government can provide customized services for different vulnerable groups. And for this, it's important to identify and set the priority areas or services for each vulnerable group. And ICT, especially frontier technologies these days, can greatly contribute to effectively addressing the widely ranging demands. Next, please. And here are two examples where IoT is being used to provide special services for vulnerable groups. The first one you can see is IoT being used for visually impaired residents in Warsaw, Poland, which enable them to move independently with the assistance via their smartphones connected to the sensors. And the second one is using the sensors installed at the houses of senior citizens living alone in the Republic of Korea, which allowed to send alarms to the emergency center when the sensors installed detect fire or other emergencies. Next, please. Another example is special supports provided to small and medium enterprises, SMEs, that are significantly impacted by COVID-19. For rapid and effective delivery of support measures, including assistance funds and digitalization support. Here you can see on the graph the different various types of support measures. Many countries provided tailored support for SMEs with simplified access and effective digital delivery systems. And for example, the public online platform to support SME digitalization of France SNU, launched a rolling information feed to SMEs to provide SMEs with live information on COVID-19 support initiatives from national and local governments, as well as from private sector actors. Next, please. And the third strategy is simplifying administrative processes. Government can map the service delivery processes and remove unnecessary bureaucratic steps and reduce administrative burden for the citizens. And typical good practices in this regard would include one-stop shop centers, integrated single portal and mobile apps for government services, and single sign-on on personal account. And government can also make efforts to remove the obstacles for vulnerable groups to access public service by, for example, providing service in multiple languages, adding special features for those with hearing or visual impairments. Next, please. And one innovative practice is the A2I initiative of Bangladesh. The government service portal helps vulnerable groups to better access public service by providing detailed information about all the services. And there are more than 5,000 decentralized one-stop digital centers at the local level. And one important aspect here is that services are delivered through multi-channels where citizens have the choice to apply for services online, to visit the service center. And their service process simplification can also effectively reduce the time, cost, and number of visits required for citizens to access them. Also, the single portal for requesting access to public information of the Dominican Republic is another example on the right that you can see is another example where citizens can receive different information at one place. Next, please. Fourth strategy is collaboration with other stakeholders, such as the private sector, civil society organizations, the expert groups, academia, and volunteers, and forging innovative partnerships. And through collaboration, government can address the resource gaps by tapping on the financial, technical, and human resources, as well as the innovative ideas and skills of other stakeholders. And particularly the concept of PPPP, public-private people partnerships, is becoming more important to provide more people-centered services. And digital platforms can facilitate effective and innovative partnerships among the stakeholders, including providing innovative mechanisms for mobilizing resources to support vulnerable groups. Next, please. Here, there are some examples. The first example is a partnership between the Ministry of Health of Rwanda and a private company to build a drone port for better delivering medical supplies to remote villages by using drones. And the second one is a case in Singapore using online platforms for crowdfunding initiatives by a nonprofit organization to support migrant workers who are impacted during the COVID-19. Next, please. And open government data can enable the development of people-centric analytics and applications, such as mobile applications by various stakeholders, allowing more services tailored to the needs of particular groups, including vulnerable populations. Also, policy labs and living labs are established to promote innovation through collaboration with partnership within and across government agencies and with other external stakeholders, respectively. And living labs can particularly foster locally based solutions through open innovation with engagement of other stakeholders. Next, please. And the fourth strategy is enhancing the role of local authorities in delivering public service. So based on their proximity to citizens, local governments are in a better position to deliver local contextual services to local citizens. Due to the limited resources and access to information at the local level, it is important to improve multi-level collaboration and coordination between national and local governments. For example, with cloud computing for better information sharing, such as e-procurement services, and enhancing policy coherence. Next, please. And this is one case from a local district of Seoul, Republic of Korea, which was one of the winners of the 2020 UN Public Service Awards. Here, the local district provides home health visits to old persons. They're building a medical welfare network, particularly in partnership with the private clinics, welfare services, and care providers. Next, please. Yes, the next part is on engagement and participation of vulnerable groups in policy processes. Next, please. And inclusive engagement is one of the 4 dimensions of quality engagement introduced by UN SCOP and IAP2. Inclusive engagement can also be measured with the 6 indicators you can see on the right, which includes inclusion of disadvantaged groups, among others. Next, please. And the levels of stakeholder engagement can be categorized into 6 processes, from communication to consultation, participation, representation, and decision-making bodies, partnership, and co-design and co-production. Next, please. And here I'd like to emphasize about co-designing and co-creating services and policies with vulnerable groups. It is a paradigm shift from a government or supply-oriented perspective to a citizen-centric perspective. And it revises and redesigns the services and policies based on an assessment of the special needs of the citizens and vulnerable groups by using data and diverse assessment methods that are indicated here. And co-designing can empower vulnerable groups to participate in the designing of the public service, taking into account of their specific needs. Next, please. And e-participation, by harnessing digital technologies, can enable effective and inclusive participation in the policy processes. Inclusion intersects with e-participation, participation, especially in relation to consultation and decision-making, as you could see in this diagram in the middle where the overlapping part is. And next, please. And in this table are some of the major examples of e-participation based on the different level of engagement, such as consultation on draft policies, e-voting, you can see m-voting, e-petition, among others. Next, please. And to introduce some of the specific cases of these e-participation examples, first is the use of social media in Paraguay for co-creation of the 4th National Action Plan. And social media was used to increase the participation of citizens from the countryside and marginalized and vulnerable groups, also combined with the physical meetings. Next, please. Second example is m-voting, which allows citizens, including vulnerable groups, to participate quickly and easily in the decision-making processes, especially where mobile phone penetration rate is high. And for example, here, the m-voting system of Seoul Metropolitan Government allows location-based vote by using GPS and enhances transparency and credibility of vote results by using blockchain technology. Next, please. Next one is participatory budgeting, through which local residents can propose and vote on the projects based on their real needs. And more than 1,500 cities are adopting this. And for example, New York City Council, people, including the vulnerable groups, can make project proposals on this online map and participate in the voting process. Next, please. Last example is co-creation via innovative platforms. In the Philippines, for example, young people such as university students and local volunteers share data and information for risk reduction, disaster risk reduction via OpenStreetMap, which is an online crowdsourcing map. And similarly, in Fiji, students and youth in the community participate in drone piloting and disaster hazard mapping efforts on hazards faced by high-risk communities. Next, please. In this part, I would like to share some of the major policy issues. Next. First is addressing the digital divide and promoting digital empowerment of vulnerable groups. Now, the internet is being increasingly considered as a public good, and access to the internet is deemed as a basic human right and a lifeline, especially during the COVID-19. And second, data disaggregation by gender, age, disabilities, and etc., especially collected at the local level, is very important as it enables better identifying of vulnerable groups and understanding their special needs. And as is also emphasized in the SDG target, capacity building for increasing availability of disaggregated data is crucial. Next, please. Third one is the importance of multi-channel service delivery, as was emphasized before. Due to the digital divide and digital by default approaches by many governments, it is important that government delivers services through multiple channels, including non-digital channels for those especially who do not have access to digital device or with low digital literacy. And fourth one is enhancing interministerial interagency, as well as national to local coordination and collaboration for policy integration and coherence in social inclusion and protection. And the fifth one is the need to develop and or amend the policies and laws and regulations for alleviation of the adverse impact of emerging technologies on vulnerable groups. So for example, government to help vulnerable groups manage impact on employment and income due to the use of frontier technologies. Last but not least, it is important to develop mindsets and capacities for inclusion of vulnerable groups, which will be further elaborated in the last part of the presentation. Yes, next, please. So it is firstly highly necessary to transform the mindsets of civil servants as well as the whole society toward people-centered, inclusive, and innovative mindsets. Particularly, it's important to nurture the perception that vulnerable groups can be empowered to become innovation agents and agents of development. And it's also necessary to develop the competencies and skills for promoting social innovation. Next, please. And these are some of the major specific mindsets, competencies, and skills for public servants for promoting innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups. They are people-centered and inclusive mindset, innovative mindsets, as just mentioned, leadership and commitment for inclusion, flexibility and adaptability, accountability and transparency. We saw that quite some participants have mentioned the issue of corruption when we share the ideas, and design thinking and integrative approach, empathy to understand the vulnerabilities and difficult situations of the vulnerable groups, communications, as well as digital skills for innovative services and collaborations, among others. Next, please. Furthermore, here, as you can see in this triangle, not only the capacity to deliver engagement process and organization, but also the interest, perceptions, and willingness to participate from community, as you can see in the pink triangle, is an important factor for effective and meaningful engagement to take place. Next, please. And lastly, I would like to conclude my presentation by introducing two training toolkits, which DPIDG UNPOG has developed as part of DESA DPIDG's curriculum on governance for the SDGs to support capacity development of member states for promoting innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups. The first one is training toolkit on e-government for women's empowerment in Asia and the Pacific, co-developed with UNESCAP, which introduces how to design and implement gender-responsive e-government institutional ecosystem. And you can access the online toolkit through the link that is provided in the slide here. Next, please. And the second toolkit is the toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups, which Mr. Shim also has introduced during his remarks. This toolkit is composed of a total of 50 modules under 5 thematic clusters, and major themes addressed here, as you can see in the slide, are the ones that I just presented in this presentation today, including identifying vulnerability, governance innovation, toward inclusive and participatory governance, public service innovation, harness digital government and frontier technologies, creating enabling ecosystems, means of implementation and monitoring and evaluation, as well as the inclusion of vulnerable groups during public health emergencies, including the COVID-19. And this toolkit can be accessed at the UNPEN website via this link you can also see here. And if you are from a government organization and are interested in receiving DESA's capacity development support, including organizing the trainings, please do contact us, write to us to further discuss possible collaboration. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you find my presentation helpful for promoting innovation for inclusion of vulnerable groups and ensuring leaving no one behind in your country and organization. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Back to you, Keping.
Okay, thank you, Mikkel, for delivering a very comprehensive presentation on the challenges of inclusion of vulnerable groups and proposing approaches and strategies on innovation for inclusive public service delivery and the participation of vulnerable groups in policy processes. Those country cases introduced a very good reference for our participants to understand some innovative practices on the ground. Also, I thank you also for introducing two training toolkits as the capacity and the mindsets, not just civil servants, but also other stakeholders, especially vulnerable groups, are equally important for inclusion of vulnerable groups. Thank you. So now let me have the honor to invite Ms. Atsuko Akuda, Regional Director, IT Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, to deliver her presentation on bridging the digital divide and promoting digital inclusion for all. Ms. Akuda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mr. Sim, for inviting ITU to this very important event. And thank you, Mikyon. Your presentation was very useful. I think there is a link to what you were saying to my presentation. So I think that it will flow very well. Next slide, please. I will today talk about the global trends and how the connecting the unconnected and vulnerable groups would look like from an ICT perspective, especially from the connectivity and infrastructure, as some of the participants identified them as the bottlenecks. So let me start with the global framework. Some of you may know that the Secretary General of the United Nations issued a roadmap for digital cooperation, and some of the topics which came up in the Mentimeter are, in fact, some of the key pillars of this eight focus areas of this roadmap. And we, ITU, as well as other agencies, are supporting the government as well as UN country teams to advance the implementation along these 8 pillars. Next slide, please. And specifically at ITU, we have a mandate, Connect 2030, around growth, inclusiveness, sustainability, innovation, and partnership, and to connect the unconnected and to reduce the digital divide. At the bottom and at the heart of this initiative, we have the vulnerable groups and people in remote and rural areas who are not benefiting from the digital technology at the moment. So I will talk more about it in the slide. Next slide, please. So current state of connectivity in Asia and the Pacific specifically. Next slide, please. The first a feature or first emerging trends that we see is the impact of COVID-19 on infrastructure and networks. As you can imagine, suddenly many people in the world started shifting to digital platforms due to COVID-19 about a year ago. And that had a tremendous impact on the number of users as well as the expansion of the mobile networks as well as fixed. And this slide summarizes some of the key features on what does it mean from the ICT point of view. As you see, we see a jump in broadband subscriptions. We also see the increase in the number of internet users, as well as the usage at the household, as well as individual using the internet. So we believe that the IT industry as a whole coped with the negative consequences of COVID-19 well, but it doesn't mean that all the people, including the vulnerable groups, had the chance to take advantage of it. Next slide, please. In particular, in Asia and the Pacific, what is very key and emerging trend is that number one, the mobile network coverage is quite wide. In total, about 98% of the geography is covered by mobile network, but it doesn't mean that everyone can afford to benefit from the services. So that, in a way, has been translated into different types of digital divide. In particular, the digital divide between men and women, as you see on the right-hand side of the slide, as well as rural and urban digital divide. Next slide, please. And we also collect, as you know, the ICT-related data, and we have historical data. And when we look at the fixed broadband, which is like a cable or fiber optics, we see a huge disparity between countries in Asia and the Pacific. So for instance, Republic of Korea enjoys the 42.7% of people. This is actually a figure, the fixed broadband subscriptions per 100. So about half of the population has access subscriptions to fixed broadband compared to 0.05 in Timor-Leste and Afghanistan. So we believe that there is a digital divide between countries. Next slide, please. The figure, the landscape looks slightly better in terms of the mobile broadband. As you can see, it's more equitably distributed across Asia and the Pacific. However, there is still a significant difference or disparities between the countries such as Vanuatu, Japan, Singapore, Brunei to Papua New Guinea on the other side. Next slide, please. So the question is how is digital divide closed, or how we are doing to address the challenge of the digital divide? Next slide, please. So I would like to show some of the salient features that we found to answer that question. Number one is the percentage of the internet users globally. And as you see, the dark reds are the ones which have still high number of people or the segment of population not using the internet. So Asia and the Pacific, as you see, is slightly better than perhaps other regions, but still in South Asia in particular, we have a significant challenge. Next slide, please. And some of the challenges originate from the affordability of services. And this slide traces the trends related to affordability. As you see, Africa has made significant progress to reduce the cost compared to Asia and the Pacific, which made a slight improvement in 2019. Next slide, please. So as you have seen, there are some significant disparities between countries, and this slide shows and focuses on the LDCs. So in Asia and the Pacific, there are 3 out of 39 countries surveyed which have affordable internet prices, which are Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Cambodia. However, on the other side, 17% of the people among LDCs have internet access, which actually has improved significantly. The mobile coverage has expanded, and the gender digital divide, even though it's still 87%, has been reducing significantly. Next slide, please. So related to the gender disparity between men and women and who has access and capacity, this is disaggregated figures between countries. So as you see, some countries have a, in general, high average, but if you take a very close look, some countries have significant disparities between men and women who's accessing the internet and using the internet. So we believe that in Asia and the Pacific, there is a lot that we have to do to narrow this gender digital divide. Next slide, please. And in addition to the disparities between countries, we can clearly see that there is a disparity between sub-regions. East Asia traditionally has been doing quite well both in fixed broadband and mobile broadband, and the Pacific and South Asia have been catching up, but perhaps it could catch up faster moving forward, because we believe that in post-COVID-19 scenario, the digital technology will provide an effective and essential means to connect the unconnected and provide the services. Next slide, please. So in order to address some of these challenges and gaps that we have seen, what is it that ITU is doing to promote digital inclusion? And this is a question that we are asked quite often. So I have a few slides or several slides to explain our approach and our initiatives to address that. So number one, COVID-19 has been the preoccupation of ITU's work, and we have a specific dedicated initiatives to address the network strengthening, as well as capacity and information sharing related to the efforts or digital efforts related to COVID-19. So we also work with the Broadband Commission, as you see, and we work with World Bank, GSMA, and other agencies to join the forces and to make sure that we can provide reliable and trustworthy digital services at the time of crisis and leverage ICT to make to provide services for all. Next slide, please. Now, in order to address the challenges, especially where the connectivities are weak, I believe that some of the participants raised this issue of connectivity. I would like to share with you one type of approach, which is the satellite connectivity, especially in the Pacific. If you recall, Pacific has been one of the sub-regions with limited connectivity. In order to address and provide a proof of concept, ITU has installed the satellite ground stations and worked with satellite operators to provide KA band, KU bands, and other facilities to connect the remote unconnected islands. And this is the summary of what kind of the support has been provided. Next slide, please. So these ground stations and capabilities were helpful to connect the community centers, health centers, schools, and were particularly effective for emergency response. When the Cyclone Harold hit about a year ago, our satellite ground stations were the only communication means under the COVID lockdown, the government couldn't field the emergency response team to the location, but our project was found useful to facilitate and accelerate the disaster response. Next slide, please. In addition, we are often asked, so what's next after the satellite ground station? And this is the slide we normally show, which is that once you have a connectivity, the next step is to make sure that all the applications and content and services are ready and can be provided to remote and rural areas. So in the area of digital services and applications, we support e-agriculture, digital finance, mobile health, and other applications such as smart and sustainable cities. And we have supported some of the LDCs, LLDCs, as well as the countries that you see on the slides. Next slide, please. So theoretically speaking, we derive from the SDGs, and SDGs would be guiding to design the digital government, as you see in the middle. And we support the whole of government approach in addition to the sectoral support, as you see, e-agriculture, e-health, and e-education, for example. And we also provide the last mile connectivity part, which is smart cities, smart village, and smart islands, to make sure that these services actually be delivered to the people who need the information and services most. Next slide, please. In addition, as you may have seen, we are seeing an increasing number of cybersecurity incidents globally, and ITU supports the effort towards cybersecurity and uses tools such as Global Cybersecurity Index. In Asia and the Pacific, in particular, we have Singapore and Malaysia, who are listed among the top 10 countries which have a high commitment to cybersecurity. Next slide, please. And in addition to the GCI, we support the development of national cybersecurity strategy to make sure that our infrastructure connectivity are secure and trusted and reliable. I'll be happy to share any additional information or answer any question you may have on any of these. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So can you perhaps click a few more? Thank you. So we also believe that in the vulnerable groups, there, of course, as Mikyun suggested, we should really look at the specific groups and their needs. And in our minds, as I mentioned earlier, gender is one of the most important features among the vulnerable groups, as well as youth. We have a huge youth who may benefit from the digital empowerment. In addition to the support to people with disabilities. In Asia and the Pacific, for example, 15% or 690 million people are estimated to have some form of disability. So how to address their specific needs with digital technology is a priority to ITU. Next slide, please. Just to highlight some of the efforts that ITU has been implementing, Girls in ICT Day celebration is encouraging the digital empowerment of girls and young women across the region and across the globe to consider pursuing STEM and to consider pursuing a career in ICT sector so that we can create a broad-based user base among girls and young women, as well as to nurture the leadership among the women. So we hope that this will continue and effective to encourage and to narrow the gender digital divide. Next slide, please. In addition to protect, especially the vulnerable children, as you may have seen, there are many school connectivity initiatives ongoing in Asia and the Pacific, and we believe that how to develop their digital literacy is a paramount importance. So this program, Child Online Protection Initiative, we have a guidelines which has a very unique cartoons, easy to understand by children, will help raise their awareness on cybersecurity and what to do and what not to do using the multi-stakeholder approach. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In addition, we believe that there is a huge migrant community in Asia and the Pacific who are vulnerable because of a lack of access to public services. So we believe that their empowerment, their enhanced knowledge using ICT will definitely be an important tool to support that huge community of migrant in the Pacific. Next slide, please. So I very briefly mentioned about the school connectivity. One of the major initiatives that we implement with UNICEF is an initiative called GIGA, to connect the unconnected schools in Asia and the Pacific. One of the recent efforts that ITU has made is the mapping exercise. In Thailand, we mapped out which schools are unconnected, and the Ministry of Education has started connecting those schools already. Additionally, we have a specific Connect to Recover initiative highlighting and emphasizing and accelerating the effort to connect the most vulnerable communities all over the world. Next slide, please. Thank you. And in addition, just to answer some of the concerns, capacity came up as a challenge earlier. ITU has a program specifically to provide different types of technical training through ITU Academy as well as Center of Excellence. And I'll be happy to share this slide as well as URL in the chat box. Next slide, please. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, ITU also collects the statistics. Next slide, please. And that will be used for the more advanced policy and decision making, we hope, in a near future. And this event, ITU GSR, which is the global symposium for regulators, which is organized from 8 to 9 June, will discuss these emerging and persistent issues for ICT ministry decision makers and policy makers, as well as regulators, so that any challenges or remaining challenges that we have will be addressed in a concerted and sustainable manner. Next slide, please. Additionally, we see a number of the applications and use cases of emerging technologies such as AI, big data, IoT, and we would like to share some of these key features with a wide audience from 5th to 9th July, which is called Emerging Technology Week, Asia and the Pacific. And I will be happy to share the information with the participants today. Next slide. And the final slide is our report, which was published recently called Digital Trends in Asia and the Pacific 2021. There is a QR code to access the report. Many of the statistics that I highlighted in this presentation are found in this report. Next slide, please. And we welcome your access to our website and follow us on Twitter. We have more exciting initiatives and announcements to make, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. So thank you, Kevin. And I hope that I didn't go too long.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, yeah, for your very comprehensive presentation on the current state of connectivity in Asia and the Pacific, and also the challenges of the digital divide, and also the initiatives undertaken by ITU responding to promote digital inclusion. These initiatives and projects are very helpful for member states, I think. And also, also thank you for sharing the link for the report on digital trends in Asia and Pacific. So we can later to go to the website and also maybe scan a QR code for more information about the report for further information. Also, I'm pretty sure that our participants have many questions to ask you later. Yeah, thank you. So now let me have the honor to invite Mr. Rezwan, Director of Sharing Economy Development, Digital Skills and Jobs Division, Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, to introduce on the harnessing digital solutions for empowerment of vulnerable groups and economic and social well-being for all. So Mr. Rezwan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Kepping, fellow presenter, and participants of this webinar. So I'll be sharing on the Malaysian experience in harnessing the existing digital solutions to empower the vulnerable groups in terms of economic and social well-being for them. So can I have next slides, please? So before I go into this slide, let me just give a bit of background in terms of the situation in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, we have been investing, the government especially have been investing in a lot of connectivity. So we have a very good mobile penetration in Malaysia, as well as other initiatives such as having telecenters in rural areas, and to provide a stop-go approach to help the rural communities and to have access to the internet. The challenge, however, back in 2012, 2013, we realized that the usage pattern of the internet mostly for non-productive purposes. So when we look at some of the models in the internet and digital landscape, we found this sharing gig and crowdsourcing model to be one of the potential model which can be leveraged to shift the patterns of usage from non-productive to a more productive purposes. So in Malaysia, we decided that we start work on this sharing and gig economy model and to empower the vulnerable groups and bring them on board so they are not left behind when it comes to the digital economy development. So the sharing economy itself, if you look at several of these studies in the world, it is also referred to the people economy, because the participants of this economy are mostly people themselves. So in Malaysia, because of the many terms or labels that is being used, example like crowdsourcing, P2P, on-demand, freelance economy, we decided to use the sharing economy as the umbrella term that refers to this model, whereby there's supply side or the participant side, there's a market or demand side, and platform or digital platform in the middle, becoming the intermediary that connects people to the demand. So we see this as a socio-economic system powered by digital platforms, and which enables direct community participation to the economic opportunities, which could then promote equitable distribution and reduce inequalities. So that in a way address SDG 8 and SDG 10 goals. So when it comes to how the Malaysian government actually provide our intervention in this space, we actually realized that one of the issue, and this is in Malaysia, when we check with the cybersecurity in Malaysia, one of the top 10 scam issues in Malaysia is actually work from home. So many are deterred from using digital technologies to reap the benefit because they lack confidence and trust of these tools. So we need to do something to address the trust issues, and especially on the people side and of course on the business side. So we actually set up a governing committee to look at this program, and we started looking at how we can actually partner with the many platforms that is coming up and to provide solutions to the businesses and offering opportunities for the people to become participant or gig worker in this model. So in a sense, government decided that, okay, let's have an open policy to embrace the sharing economy, despite this model being disruptive to the traditional incumbent players. So we were actually trying to manage the situation in terms of addressing the incumbent and opening up to enable the targeted communities to come on board and leverage on this model. So if you look at the figure there, we highlighted that we have on the left-hand side the targeted communities. These are low-income households, the vulnerable communities that we try to address and bring on board so that they can actually participate in this digital economy. So in order to do so, we actually decided the best way is actually to create an intermediary platform. So we have two programs, e-Rezeki and the Global Online Workforce. It was actually the same program, started as e-Rezeki, and e-Rezeki is a Malay word meaning e-sustenance. So the idea is we want to help the community especially to be able to identify what kind of platform or task that is suitable, that is available and matches their capability for them to then start performing and getting income. So this intermediary platform which we created, we profile the participant. So we look at their digital work readiness, the level of their ICT skills and what kind of devices that they have, and of course in terms of their language assessment. We also look at their work preferences, their interests, and what is their existing skills and qualifications. So we actually spend time categorizing tasks and work that we see on the platforms. So when it comes to the platforms, and we also analyze the platform to identify the types of work use cases, and we map it against our own categorization, because this categorization is where we actually identify the type of skills needed for the workers to perform the task or work given. So because this is sharing economy model, and it could either leverage on your intangible asset, which is skills, time, or it can also leverage on your asset. Example, like you have a vehicle, a motorbike, a lorry, or a vehicle that you can do some of these tasks. So that's how we actually, in a way, design our program. Can I have next slide, please? So going a bit deeper, and this is, I would say, something that probably some of you would find very useful. When we look at the types of the tasks and work available, like I mentioned earlier, we understand the need to cater to the different profiles, qualification, skill sets, and also asset that they have in hand. So we categorize into three categories. The first is actually the digital micro tasks. These are tasks which we consider as simple online tasks, which requires no specific skills to be performed and can be completed in batches within several minutes. So the maximum normally we look at tasks that can be completed within 15 minutes to be considered as part of this so-called digital micro task. I'll shift first to the far right, which is the digital work. Of course, we have a more professional, high skill and domain-specific work, which require qualifications and some experience for this work to be performed. So normally, this is the so-called high-end digital freelancer. But we have actually been working with several parties. We also sought some of these experience whereby people train kids in slum areas in Bangladesh and give them digital freelance jobs. So we actually learn also from the that case study and we map it against our own culture and suitability. So, and in the middle, this is the area when we actually look at is the one that is fast growing. So in terms of this so-called digitally enabled work, whereby people are now on mobile phones and in Malaysia, and again, mobile phone penetration is very high. And we know that they can actually use their mobile devices and to install the appropriate applications and obtain work to be performed. So this is where we actually look at the mushrooming of the models and by startups especially, and map in terms of the requirements and how this can actually be given to qualified vulnerable communities. So this area, which is also termed as the Uberization of services, continues to grow, and especially in a services-based sector, and there are permutation of models, and we see a lot of things actually are now being enabled through these digital applications. So over there in the slides, I also share some of the example of the micro tasks, some of the example of the digitally enabled work, and also example of the digital work. So you can see when it comes to the example, for example, in terms of the tasks under the digitally enabled work, there are general tasks, for example, like running errands, delivery services, cleaning and housekeeping, which can be performed by the vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, with some guidance and training. Even cooking, traditional traffics, event crew or part-time crew, fixings, some of the domestic services, and even in tourism, they can actually become, the term is experienced host, and become a host to the tourists in terms of sharing local cultures and local foods and whatnot. Okay. So in terms of sharing economy, of course, there are discussion around definition in terms of how do we refer to them. So over there, there's some definitions that we normally propose in terms of whether they are supposed to be termed as part-timers, gig workers. But I think when it comes to the official definition of gig freelancers, most of the government are still in the process of coming up with the official definition. So next, please. So if you remember the figure in my first slide just now, we also highlighted the list of platforms. So we have actually in Malaysia, and over the last 5-6 years, and work on verifying and bringing on board platforms that can actually help us to address the vulnerable communities. So one of the criteria when we select this platform is that we identify whether there are tasks or jobs and that can be given to the B40 communities, the marginalized communities. So through the e-Rezeki program and the Global Online Workforce Program, we actually segmentize the platform. And for e-Rezeki program, for example, we targeted communities with household income less than USD 1,100 a month, blue-collar workers, unemployed, retirees, people with disabilities, single mothers, and also the urban poor communities. So in terms of the participants in this e-Rezeki program, normally are referred to as the gig workers, and they normally able to provide services, and most of these services are semi-skills, medium to the low end. So the global online workforce is where we actually look at the strategy to also address especially the children of the vulnerable communities, because some of these children, through assistance from the government, they have access to education. But if we do not do any proper intervention, some of them will go back to become vulnerable again. So through global online workforce and also addressing the increasing rate of unemployed youth, and we address university graduates and underemployed graduates, because sometimes there are graduates with a higher degree, but they go for jobs with lower certificate because they could not find jobs or employment that suits their higher education, retrenched workers, and even people with disabilities. So this is to us a new form of employment, especially for skilled workers to win jobs. And in Malaysia, we try to focus on exporting the talent to global market, because we understand even in global market there's shortage of talent, and the thing is sometimes people are very afraid when it comes to going international, but eventually through our program we convince them that the world is still in need for even simple skills like HTML or even some so-called obsolete languages, because some of the old systems still need to be maintained. So these are areas where we actually look at and try to position some of our talent, not only to address the new languages like Python and whatnot, or even go for more complex jobs, but there are opportunities because the global market means that you are not limiting yourself to only one segment or certain particular employers. So basically, you just need to look at, and there would be opportunities knocking on your door. So these are lists of 106 local platforms. We also work with international platforms such as freelancer.com, upwork.com. So these are two big platforms which provide opportunities to the Malaysian participants. And in terms of the honeycomb, we have attempted to also categorize the service segment. So this is actually very helpful when we go out and highlight to the community that normally, because the community normally thought that there's only one types of jobs, which is just doing delivery, but actually there's other jobs, tasks, and platforms that actually cater for different kind of services. So we even have like for traditional therapists, we have even for things like part-time crew. So that there's a lot of other things that actually can be looked at and explore. So next slide, please. So this is just to share some of the results. So over the last 5 years, within the 11 Malaysian plan period, we have trained 354,000 B40s and vulnerable communities. The private sector also conducted their own training. And with that, we saw the number of people actually earning income is almost like 700,000. Of course, some of them are seasonal income earners. Some of them found that this can become their source of primary income. That one, in terms of choice, we'll leave it to them. We are not pushing them to all become full-time. We know that some of them even work on multiple platforms to maximize the opportunity to earn income. So cumulatively, the participants of this program over the last 5 years generated 1.36 billion ringgit in income. So we have also been aware of the other issues of social protection, and we have been in discussion with the SOCSO, which is the government funded agency for social security, and the EPF, which is the Employer Providence Fund in Malaysia. So these two government agencies have created a scheme or a program to help self-employed individuals to also receive protection and save for their futures. And we also work with private sectors and banks for microcredit and micro insurance for freelancers. Next, please. So this is just to provide some interesting insight. We conducted actually a impact study on our program. So in terms of the feedback that we received, and aside to earning extra income, the participant also managed to tap on this program to reduce their debts and also improve saving. So you can see the program actually helped participant by 66% to reduce debt and improve savings by 69%. So, and again, like I mentioned earlier, many of them found that they can actually perform multiple tasks and to more than double the income per hour. And 71.3% agreed that this program actually contributed to improving of their well-being, and also the program actually created opportunities to the disadvantaged group by 73.8%. So in terms of policy improvements, of course, we also observe this area. We understand that there is still a need to improve access to fixed broadband and computers in terms of incentive for the participants to continue upskill and reskill themselves. So opportunity for them to have some kind of self-learning environment and to further strengthen the social protection aspect, because at the moment we do have some limitation with the existing program. We need to make it more portable so that these workers, when they shifted between one platform to another, there's less issues that they have with shifting, because some of them, they started maybe with one platform, then discovered that there are a different platform that looks more interesting to them. So they wanted to shift, but the current design of some of the program by the government has some limitation. So we need to look at strengthening on portable social protection. Okay, so next. So that's my last slide. So I thank you very much. And I want to highlight that when it comes to addressing the vulnerable communities, we need to work together. So hence the photo on my this slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Razran. Actually, your presentation is very important, especially during this COVID-19 period, as the monogroups are really severe hit by this kind of crisis. They lose their jobs, lose their incomes. So your introduction about the initiative by the Malaysia government, especially the contribution by MDEC to how to empower the vulnerable groups in digital economy, is really very good innovative practices that other countries can learn from your institution. And also, you also especially mentioned about the importance of open policy and building the trust, and also the two initiatives for people-centric economic growth. And also, what's your initiative to also to improve the digital inclusion of vulnerable groups? So all this is kind of very important for many kind of developing countries. Yeah. So yeah, and also you have an agenda for further improve the digital inclusion. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So since you are still here, just to finish this presentation, may I ask one question? That from your perspective, what are the major challenges to empower vulnerable groups in digital economy to empower the vulnerable groups? What's the major challenges if you list the major challenges? Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of areas that was highlighted during the first session just now, but from our experience, the main challenges is actually changing the mindset of these vulnerable communities. So we need to address that as well, because again, the issue of trust is one that need to be first addressed, because of course this community, they sometimes skeptical whether we are serious or not in helping them. So that's number one. And even for us to go in and help them, we need to really understand their challenges and try to design something that will actually help them, rather than we add or create new issues or challenges to them. Of course, the other issues, for example, like access and connectivity and equity or ownership of the right devices is also important. But that once you able to basically bring them on board, get their buy-in. In the case of Malaysia, for example, there are like, for example, telecenters that can be used in the beginning to address the lack of having access and connectivity. Over time, once they have confidence and start earning income, they themselves are able to invest in getting a better device. Of course, government also sometimes offer discounted devices. Even during COVID-19, we saw government in Malaysia, for example, provide free internet access on daily basis, especially to help students to learn, because not everybody have a good mobile data subscription. So government actually intervened by providing that. So I think that's I would say the two mindset and of course the issue of having the right infrastructure.
Okay, thank you so much, Razwan. So now in the Q&A box, we have several questions. Although, I mean, this question has been addressed by Ms. Atsuko Kuda, but I still want to raise the issue again in the open. So Mr. Akuta, may I ask you the question from Marisa Tabula Amos? Her question is very general, but still I think it's very meaningful. So her question is about what are the measures or steps taken by the UN and other agencies like ITU to help these poor nations be connected and overcome the digital divide? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kepin. This is a very important question. And as I mentioned, affordability is a key stumbling block in connecting the unconnected. However, just looking at the LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS globally, there are many countries which are doing extremely well to achieve that. So for instance, Bangladesh and Myanmar provide the affordable internet access. Bhutan has a very high rate of mobile access. So it's not the only inhibiting factor that will prevent all the countries. Instead, I believe that there are many means to make sure that the investments made in infrastructure can be used and maximize the benefits using for education, health, agriculture, commerce, and many different purposes in society. So I believe that there are means and there are ways to make sure that this will happen and this can take place within limited financial resources.
Okay, thank you, Atsuko. Next, I will ask one question for Atsuko and Mr. Razwan, both of you. The question is from Ms. Sonja Water from the Seoul National University. The question is, can innovations really increase inclusion, or do they widen the gaps for vulnerable groups due to the lack of access to technology? So maybe Mr. Razwan, you go first.
Okay, thank you. So when it comes to innovation, I think we have heard this concept several times, especially looking at the innovation from the bottom, finding best solutions, even coming from the community themselves in order to address the challenges that they have. I would say innovation, if it's done right, and it will contribute to bringing in the community and to be inclusive, and we're not going to be excluding them. But sometimes what one model cannot be simply replicated to a different society, because the innovation, when something is being innovated and by that community or for that community, it suits that community, but it not necessarily suits the other community. So you need to do some form of customization so that it fits into that community. So you cannot just simply think that, okay, there's one size fits all solution. So that's what we learned from our program, because, example, when we try to address people with disabilities, you have to look at the different types of disabilities that they have. So if you address those, for example, normal people, you go by this one approach. But if you even want to address people with disability, and the different types of disability require different types of tweaking and customization of the solution in order for them to be able to actually then have the feeling and start participating and creating value from there. So I think that's my simple response first.
Thank you, Mr. Razwan. Ms. Akuta.
Thank you. And again, it's an excellent question. In a very high-level answer, if I may, access itself may not be the factor to expand or to widen the digital divide, but I believe that even if the access is there in rural areas, the population themselves may or may not know how to take advantage of it. So if we compare the urban population and rural population having same access to the internet, for example, there will be a higher chance that urban populations will come up with more innovative use and solutions and products than rural areas, simply because they may or may not be aware of what's possible. So it may not be only the access issue, but all the other ecosystem that may not be in place in rural areas. So that may create widening of the digital divide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Now I would like to direct a question to Ms. Mi-Kyung Park. The question is from Mr. Jack Tama from Papua New Guinea, Department of ICT. He's advisor on digital delivery. Okay, this question is for Mr. Akuta, sorry. Yeah, so the question is what the PPP models are available for ICT projects, given ICT projects vary greatly in scope?
Thank you. Again, it's a very important question. Thank you for asking. Now, PPP model is very important for especially infrastructure projects. And that will really capitalize on the public sector, private sector expertise and the resources to make sure that the infrastructure is provided in the place where commercial viability may be questionable. However, what we see in many cases is not really the money part or the PPP model per se, but the government ability to manage this whole arrangement of PPP, which is very complex in terms of the contract creation, enforcement of the contracts, and risk mitigation and the ownership to get to the end of this arrangement. So in many cases in Asia and the Pacific, there are only, I believe, a few countries which have successful PPP model, which is applied to the ICT sector. So in the future, I hope that this is something that perhaps UNPOG and ITU can work together to make sure that this model works in all countries, especially countries where this is needed. And this model can be used to produce more infrastructure and networks moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your good proposal that maybe in the future, our two offices can work together on this very pragmatical matter, yeah, for the member states, yeah. So now the next question is for Ms. Mi-Kyung Park, yeah. The question is from Mohammed Ziao from Ministry of Public Administration. He is the Joint Secretary of this ministry. The question is, due to existing digital divide, are we heading for a further gap in the ability to innovate for better public governance? Yeah. Ms. Park, you have the floor. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Keping, for this very important question. As has been emphasized throughout the session, the digital divide is a significant, important challenge to many populations, including the vulnerable groups. And to the question asked whether the existing digital divide is leading to a further gap in the ability to innovate for better public governance. Yes, first, because for better public, for harnessing digital technologies is becoming a more and more important part of innovation for better public governance. And especially in the current COVID-19 situation, as was also shown in my presentation, it is expected that digital technologies will continue to play an important role in the post-COVID-19 era, which particularly became a driving engine for accelerating digital transformation in many countries. And indeed, access to digital technologies and the digital skills and the literacy is important, as harnessing digital technology is not only a separate means of forging public governance innovation, but more importantly, it functions as an important enabler for advancing other various types of public governance innovation, such as process innovation, organizational innovation, institutional innovation, etc. And as was also shown in our first Mentimeter question, while it was one of the choices, the harnessing digital technology was one of the choices, harnessing digital technology indeed is not a standalone means, but rather at the same time an enabler for other effective means for enabling participation, such as institutionalizing engagement mechanism, open government data, monitoring and review. So from that perspective, the access and ability to harness digital technology, this is becoming more and more essential part as ability to forge public governance innovation. And one more important dimension is that innovation in public governance is no longer driven by government only, but also in collaboration with and partnership with other stakeholders, including vulnerable groups themselves, most importantly, as also was highlighted in my presentation. So co-creation, co-designing is becoming more and more important. And this regard, the digital divide confronted by the vulnerable groups and the society may affect the ability to harness the potentials of many citizens, including the vulnerable groups, as agents of innovation, as agents of development. And it will also affect the ability of the government to effectively harness the resources, collective intelligence from these populations, which are becoming more and more important. For example, in the case of contribution of youth in disaster risk reduction. And in this regard, it is important that the government together or in collaboration with other stakeholders takes proactive measures and policies to bridge the digital divide issues and develop digital skills and capacities of all citizens, and in this regard, enhancing access to digital technologies and other infrastructure, capacity development programs, as well as shared by myself and other speakers, mindset change, establishing laws and regulations, creating an enabling environment at all levels, particularly at the local level, is highly critical for forging public governance innovation. Just one more point, last but not least, digital cooperation at all levels, including international level, between and among countries, as also was emphasized by Ms. Okuda, through North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation is also important for sharing the experiences and the lessons learned for effectively addressing the digital divide and further empowering and strengthening the ability of government and the whole society for forging public governance innovation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Park. Now I have the last question for Ms. Atsuko. So this question you already answered in the Q&A box, but still I want to raise this issue in the open. So the question is from Mr. Ramis Uddin. He worked for the Air-to-Eye initiative of the government of the Bangladesh. So his question is, what do you think, which 5 groups are high priority to ITU for ensuring digital connectivity with leaving no one behind respect overall and global? Mr. Kuta.
Thank you. So I try to answer the question based on the size and the complexity of the situation that groups are in. For instance, if we look at the number, we believe that young girls and young women will be an important group simply because of the number and the size of the community. And additionally, as I may have mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation, 650 million people in Asia and the Pacific have some sort of disability. So how to address their needs with specific technology is a priority. Additionally, people in rural areas, people with low income, and if I can add refugees and migrants who may or may not have access to public services, to me constitute the major 5 groups of vulnerable groups. But if you can ask me if I can add more vulnerable groups, I will come up with more groups. But I believe that these 5 will represent the priorities that I can see because of the size and complexities where they are in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Akuta. So before I conclude this session, so I would like also maybe invite Mr. Bokun Shim. Do you want to say a few words before we wrap up this session? You are unmuted, Mr. Shim.
Thank you, Keping. Really, I appreciated the excellent presentation from distinguished speakers, and I appreciate the active participation from the audience. Thank you very much for this excellent session.
Okay. Also, I would like to invite our 3 speakers to make like a 30 seconds comments, for the further collaboration, for the future cooperation. Yeah. So may I start with Mr. Redran?
Okay, yes. In terms of our experience, I did mention that some of the lessons learned, we learn from and we look at other countries, example like what was done in Bangladesh, what was done in Australia and a couple of other places. And we actually innovate that. And we realize that there's a need for more exchange and sharing of this kind of success stories and approaches for other government, especially to look at how can government best intervene and provide so-called digital inclusion to especially the vulnerable communities.
Okay, thank you so much. I also hope that we can also further expand the South-South cooperation through this kind of a similar practice to introduce the country practices. Yeah. So now I would like to invite Ms. Mikung Park to say a few words about what we're doing and what's our planning in this area. Ms. Park?
Yes, thank you very much, Keping. In addition to what I have introduced about the 2 training toolkits for the capacity development in this area, which were again in the area of fostering women's empowerment through e-government and toolkit on government innovation for social inclusion of vulnerable groups. Our office, as part of DPIDG, DESA, has been actively working on promoting effective harnessing innovation and technologies, specifically digital government, for supporting member states in the area of building inclusive, effective, and transparent public institutions for SDG implementation. And we've been, in addition to the capacity development, our office has been conducting research and policy analysis, including the policy briefs in the area of leveraging frontier technologies, such as big data analytics for COVID-19 response, as well as other webinars on the issues of digital transformation and e-government, particularly, but not limited to, for inclusive and innovative measures for promoting public governance, innovation, and SDG implementation. Another very important function of our work is to facilitate, as has been already highly emphasized by other participants, is to facilitate cooperation and partnership among the member states. And for example, online discussion board that has been also shared during the chat box is one of our means and mechanism to support, to facilitate continued dialogue and discussion between the member states, as well as other stakeholders, experts, experts from various areas. Yes, so we look forward to continued collaboration with the member states as well as the partnering agencies, including ITU as well as MDEC. And as I have mentioned in my presentation, if you're from a government organization that are interested in receiving UNDESA's capacity support, development support, including organizing the trainings, please do reach us and write to us for further discussion on possible collaboration. Yes, thank you very much. And we look forward to continued collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Park. Ms. Akuta, a few comments.
Thank you.
Comments,
Thank you very much, Mr. Sim and Kepin and Mikyon. As usual, this has been managed so well. It's a very, very impressive session. And thank you very much for inviting ITU to this the session of important topic. And I really enjoyed listening to you and listening to the participants. It was a very, very fruitful conversation. And I believe that this is a wonderful example of digital cooperation, capitalizing on different expertise of different agencies and different perspectives. So I look forward to working closely with you and UN UNPOG in particular, and make sure that we can address some of the concerns which were expressed by participants. And maybe in the next meeting, we will have some answers and joint initiatives between us. So thank you. Back to you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you so much. So taking this occasion, I really, on behalf of all the attendees of this session, I will thank all our speakers for your excellent presentation and introduce many kind of innovative practices. Yeah, it's really very helpful for us. Yeah. So before I conclude, there's several kind of logistic announcements. First, all the presentation and video recordings will be posted on the UNPOG website. Secondly, please fill out this post-event survey for this session. So really like to hear about you, what we can further improve. The third one, because due to time limits, we cannot have answer all the questions. So please log on and register for the online discussion board for further interactive discussions. If you have also many further questions, you can also direct the question to our speakers. We can also ensure that this question will be directed to them for answers. Yeah. With that, I hope you all enjoy this session and I wish you all a good day. Thank you. Thank you so much. That concludes our.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.